Hi everyone, welcome to Sagar Manthan. Today we will be discussing Europe and the Indo-Pacific with a very good panel. On the panel we have Anna Maria Corazza Bildt, who is a former member of the European Parliament, and Bart de Jong, who is Special Advisor, International Relations, Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management of the Netherlands. So both of you, welcome to this conversation.
Thank
Anna,
you.
I'll start with you. Indo-Pacific is a very big debate these days. I think a lot of commentary in Delhi specifically thinks it's come a little late in Europe, but now we do hear about Indo-Pacific a lot in Europe. Just as a sort of broad overview, we are in a very interesting time. There are a lot of conflicts taking place, and fewer and fewer off-ramps are being seen when it comes to these conflicts, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Gaza, and Indo-Pacific is seen as an opportunity, but it's also seen as where tensions reside in Asia. Within all this, we are also looking at climate change, we are looking at sustainability, we are looking at supply chains and so on and so forth. What's your broad view from Europe of the Indo-Pacific, and what's the Europe's real role in it? It is distant, right, geographically, but what's the European thinking these days?
Well, we feel it very close, actually, because of the dark clouds that are really darker and darker from my point of view, from many European points of view. They're going to be even more dark after 20th January for the world, not only for Europe. I see that the relationship between the Indo-Pacific region and India and Europe are really good news. I feel really optimistic and hopeful for the future. For the first, they are mind-boggling. We are the first trading partner. We are the biggest investor in the Indo-Pacific regions. We Europeans, we have trillions of trade relationships. We are main partners when it gets to sustainability, ocean conservation, coral reef, blue economy, maritime security. I don't like reading usually, but I would like to tell you how much this is European policy. Mm-hmm. This is the conclusion of the European Council, European Parliament, European Commission, the policy that has officially been adopted at the end of 2021. Just to give you a few key words,
sure.
This is all of us Europeans. Indo-Pacific is increasingly strategically significant for Europe. EU intends to increase its engagement with the region, with building partnership, reinforcing the rule-based international order based on sustainable development goals, the Paris Agreement, mutually beneficial relationship. The future of EU and the Pacific are inextricably linked, given the interdependence of our economy, common challenges, and it goes on and on and on. Yeah. We are natural regional partners, trade, investment, the EU is top investment, and so on and so forth. 70% of global trade goes to the Indo-Pacific. This is 20 pages of that. Yeah. So it's not like one or the other. This is what we all have together subscribed. Yeah. And since then, since 2021, we have concluded free trade agreements. We concluded with South Korea when I was member of the European Parliament. We concluded now with Australia, with New Zealand, with Japan. All these free trade agreements means, for South Korea, just an example, 50% more trade. But it's not only trade, it's also services. Yeah. It's digitalization, it's sustainability. So we're talking about holistic, comprehensive, sustainable, long-term relationship. What are the principles that are based on? The rule of law. This is the key. Common shared values, reciprocity in access market, equality, a common commitment to sustainability, a common commitment to maritime security. So there's a lot of unites us.
Fantastic. Bart, just taking off some of the points just raised right now. First and foremost, trade is very central to a lot of these debates these days, right? Especially between Europe and India, more than anything else. But it is also sort of, we see these discussions taking place about a deglobalized world. It's becoming harder to deal with trade. Some countries are looking more inward than outwards than you would expect them to be. How do you see from a European point of view specifically, sitting here in New Delhi, which really advocates these days of going out and doing business with everyone? What are the sort of core challenges that we face today when it comes to supply chains? That's something we hear so often, right? Because what we experience about supply chains, a word I don't think many people were familiar with pre-COVID. It became very sort of known post-COVID, right? So are we sort of en route to becoming a similar kind of integrated planet that we were pre-COVID, or are challenges much more diverse now than they used to be earlier?
I think that, as Anna Maria just indicated, our economies are so intertwined, Europe and the Indo-Pacific region, that there is no alternative to that. But what we've learned, as you call it the COVID crisis, but there's multiple crises at the moment, that we've learned all that we are so dependent on too few supply chains, that what the lesson learned is we need to diversify in the first place. We need to diversify not only geographically, but also when it comes to certain resources. Diversification is key here, I would say. And that is what's happening. But it's very difficult to look at Indo-Pacific as one homogeneous region, because you have so many differences within the region, geopolitical, socioeconomic systems, development stages also. So what we need to do in Europe, from a government point of view, is have a tailor-made approach for each and every country or group of countries. For instance, in Europe, we're looking at ASEAN. The ASEAN 5 at the moment is a group. India is a group in itself, because of its sheer size. So that's what's happening. And that is a task for governments, but diversifying supply chains is also, of course, a responsibility for the private sector itself. And then picking that up, what you see companies doing is investing in China plus one, basically. Of course, pre-COVID it was mainly China, and now they're investing. Not disinvesting, I would say, in China as yet, but new investments go to other countries in the region.
Right.
And so it works in two sides: private sector, but also governments.
Yeah. May I just probe that a little bit? We are talking about sort of the importance and centrality of business, right, at the center of all this. Now that there is a lot of concern about policy-wise where we are going in the next couple of years, what is globalization and whether it actually works, it doesn't work, all those very fundamental questions that were not there earlier. As people in policy, what's the business move right now in Europe, right? Are there, of course there are opportunities, but are there opportunities good enough for them where they feel it's good enough to risk their money into it? Or is it much more complicated now than it used to be?
Of course,
we can.
Yeah,
I was here with a big delegation of top businessmen from the Nordic countries. I think that shows what others would tell you in the rest of Europe in the business community. We got the message that India is open for business, that is very serious, both in the digital and in the green revolution, and that is willing to become the manufacturer for Europe with skilling and reskilling. So what does it mean? We have enormous complementarities and synergies that European business is absolutely grasping. And in the port system, in the maritime system, we see companies, the biggest European companies like Maersk or CM, the French CGM, thousands of vessels here. We have the port of Hamburg and the port of Rotterdam, who have enormous partnership with Singapore, with other ports here. We have facilities funded actually by the European Union, who's also the biggest development cooperation giver in the region, to upgrade and digitalize 7 ports from Vietnam to Bangladesh. So there's a lot. Our research funding is also going to companies to upgrade, automatize, robotize, digitalize. You have SAP, one of the biggest companies in Europe, German, who is digitalizing, very much bringing software to the Indonesian and Vietnamese digitalizing revolution. You have Siemens, who is in a big project of upskilling and digitalizing manufacture. I mean, this is just few examples. I'm sure Bart has many others.
No, absolutely. I can second that. Any trade mission coming from Europe to anywhere in the Indo-Pacific is attracting every time more companies than the time before. So that is what's happening. We also see companies investing, to take this in the example now, in India more than they did before. And India, indeed, as you just said, is more promoting itself now as a country we can also produce, not only sell. And that's what's happening. So we see big companies investing in India as a producing country. That would also mean that exports will go up. And this is where the maritime connection comes in. If you have more exports, of course, you need a proper transport infrastructure and a port infrastructure. And this is what this conference is about, of course.
Exactly.
That's what we're working on.
And there are some even broader projects in play. For example, IMEC was something that came up in the G20 last year. Now there have been setbacks since, considering the prevailing situation in the Middle East. But what is your, both of you, what are your general views on these big interconnectivity projects, which is trying to sort of attach Asia to Europe almost fully by land also, along with the maritime thing? Is the feasibility there, or is it a very long-term thing that may work or may not work? We'll start with you, then we can go to Bart.
I think that in the long term it will work. It won't be there from one day, from day one, so to say. That costs, yes, of course, to develop. But what we in Europe have seen is for transport infrastructure, you need to have alternatives. You need to have options for shipping companies that ship us, I should say. They should have an option, not only one, not only the sea route or not only the land route. If you have what we done in Europe, intermodal connections, inland waterways, short sea, rail, road, then you get the best optimized system.
Right.
And also, if one of the chains is disrupted or one of the modes is disrupted, you have alternatives to that.
Right.
So that is only a good thing. And IMEC is actually, in the way I understand it, I don't know too much about it, but it's actually working on that, offering an alternative by land, but also by sea.
Yeah, I really agree. I think we have learned after COVID, and also because of the enormous dependencies that we have in the way our economies are going towards electrification, digitalization. We are now so dependent on batteries, for instance, coming from Japan or South Korea. We are so dependent on semiconductors coming, from basically Taiwan or Japan. And really our economies are completely dependent from that. So the vulnerability to geopolitical tensions, which are, of course, more and more worrying, make that we in Europe really think that resilience and diversification are two of the key principles. That's why you hear this talk about decoupling, de-risking, and diversifying all the time. But it's very important to say we do not want to be protectionist. I mean, the line of the European Union is free market, free access, open and free trade, based on the rule of law, based on the WTO. That's why another big worry that we have, apart from the resilience, the security part, which is the piracy, which is the Suez Canal, which is creating so much more cost to go around Africa with the Houthis. And there we are cooperating also. We have a joint maritime security operations also. And all the other challenges to security. I mean, we know around Taiwan, in the South China Sea, or the risks that they are. And we also have the issue of preserving free trade. And we are not at all sure that after 20th of January, that's going to be the case. If there is going to be a stepping up of the trade war between China and the United States, we're all going to be caught into that. If the tariffs and the quotas and so on, then it becomes retaliation. So I think we need to work even more between Europe, India, and the Indo-Pacific regions to preserve a rule-based international free trade and maritime routes based, as Bart was saying yesterday, we were agreeing on commonly developed standards, legal framework and technical standards. I really hope that the trade agreement that is being negotiated between the European Union and India will move forward, and that we will overcome obviously the different cultures, the different philosophy, the protectionist tensions, the bureaucracy, the procedures, and all I've been part of the negotiation of some free trade agreement. There's a lot on the table, but we have a common interest to achieve that.
But Bart, very quickly, as you mentioned, that there is this sort of underlying fear, if I may, of a larger sort of US-China contestation taking place, having a negative impact on trade, on tariffs, and so on and so forth. So you mentioned, you both mentioned the importance of free markets. Are we actually moving towards more free markets, or is there going to be a recession in that thinking a little bit?
Well, here again, you can't speak for uniform global development here. I think it's in our European interest. Yes, that is definitely, it makes it even more imperative that we go for free trade relations with the Indo-Pacific. And that is what the European Union is doing. Because we as member states, the competence for trade is of course with the European Union, and that's what we're aiming for, this free trade agreement. Because that's essential. If you can have fantastic intermodal trade routes, the IMEC, whatever, you can have fantastic port infrastructure. If there is no cargo, it's useless.
That's true.
So, and for cargo, you need free trade. And that is definitely our belief in Europe, in the Netherlands also.
Fantastic. Yeah.
There's one more thing I need to say, I wanted to say, is that, of course, all the economies in the Indo-Pacific are, as I said, on different levels and stages of development. The European Union has this Global Gateway program.
Exactly.
We have an outreach program to countries that have emerging economies. And that is actually where a lot of energy and a lot of money is going to as well, to lift these countries up and also to make sure that they can compete on global markets and participate in these free trade areas.
Right. All right, just since you're running out of time, just final question to both of you. You very briefly mentioned security. Geoeconomics is is the buzzword these days. You keep hearing it a lot. But interestingly, I personally find that there are often it's often seen as slightly a bit disentangled with the idea of security itself, right? That you don't require that kind of security infrastructure for these projects to actually sustain themselves in the long run. What kind of thinking is there in Europe on general security matters in the Indo-Pacific? I know there's been a lot of port calls from the German Navy and from the French Navy and so on and so forth, and we are seeing more military engagements as well. But as far as the importance of security, let's say in the Red Sea is concerned, as you mentioned, the Suez Canal just carries so much trade. I was reading somewhere that almost $150 billion worth of trade has actually moved out of the Suez in a broader sense. What are Europe's core concerns when it comes to security, especially in the maritime field, where groups like the Houthis have this kind of inadvertent effect on trade, almost have a free hand at times to divert trade away? Like, what's the European thinking about dealing with these kind of situations in the future?
Yeah, we are very concerned. That's why we had an Operation Atalanta. We are still there as European Union, coupled with the United States, who have been directly actually engaging with the Houthis, and of course with India as well. And let me say, from a European point of view, we see the current Russian regime with Putin as a threat for the world, not only to Ukraine and to Europe, because it's about changing the order of peace and security in the world by respecting the rule of law that we commonly agree, the Charter of the United Nations, to using force. And by a member of the United Nations, this is very dangerous. Then we see a China that is more and more aggressive and not necessarily willing to follow the WHO common grounds. And we now see a United States who's coming up, who's been our friend and ally, who is now coming up with a president that is challenging the rule of law, so that there's an overarching threat to a rule-based order, which is important, of course, for maritime security, of course, for trade, but it's also important for peace and security. And that's where really we hope to join forces with India and other like-minded countries in the Indo-Pacific to also ensure security and secure the free maritime routes, because at the basis also of our, it's not only prosperity, it's our lifelines.
That's true, final word to you.
Well, that's exactly the same thinking in the Netherlands, actually. You mentioned Germany, France having naval visits to India. Netherlands had one as well. We participated in this naval deployment in several times already. One in the Red Sea and around that area, and one in the naval fleet that went all up the way to Japan and back, and the signal there was, hey, we believe in open and free sea lanes based on the United Nations law of the sea, and that is also what we stand for and what we want to defend. And
exactly,
that's definitely what we will do in the future.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great talking to you, and thanks everyone for tuning in.